All right, so in this video, we're going to make our cards stack on top of each other, give them some random values to transform them, but also let's begin by just centering them on top of each other in general, rather than having them go all over the place like this. So on my card component, I've given them a class name of card. I've already imported card.css, which is empty, and I'm going to start by selecting that card class and giving it a position of absolute, and then I'm going to set the left to be 0 and the right to be 0. And you can see they are now stacking on top of each other. The next thing I'm going to do is come over here and do a margin auto, which is now going to center the cards for us, although they are on top of the button. So we're going to have to deal with that because we're not getting that button. So I'm going to wrap them in a div instead of the deck right here, make a new div, put the cards in there, and then I'm going to give the div a class name of deck-card area, maybe. And then in my deck CSS, which I've already imported as well, I'm going to select deck-card area and give it a margin top of, let's do like 80 pixels. And now when I click, our cards are stacking on top of one another. Everything looks good. Now we're going to add in some random transformations. All right, so I'm going to go to the the CSS for a moment and show you what we're trying to replicate. So we're going to set a property called transform to translate some number, x and y. So let's do translate 10 pixels, comma 20 pixels. Now we're going to do this randomly inside of our React component, but this is what it looks like. Well, that's not very useful for me to show you. Let me do it in the browser here. Select one of these cards, and I'm going to give it an element.style in the browser of transform translate of, let's do one, how about 30 pixels, comma 30 pixels. So you can see that is moving it to the left and right and top and bottom, these numbers. So if I did like 100 there, we are translating it down 100 pixels. Now the other thing we're going to talk about is rotating it. So I can rotate it by passing in a number of degrees, like 10 degrees, DEG, and that will rotate it. So I want to do this randomly, and I want to do both of them. So my string needs to look like translate some number of pixels, space, rotate some number of degrees, like that. Except we're not going to do it inside of here because that will be for every single card and they'll just be on top of each other looking exactly the same. So in my card.js, inside of the render, I'm just going to paste that in so we have a reference guide. But then I'm going to start by picking a random angle. So let's call this variable angle, math.random times 90. So that's going to give us some random angle, and then I played with some values, and it looked best for me when I subtracted 45, just to narrow the range. And then we're also going to do an x variable for the translate. So x, let's call it x position, pause, math.random times 40 minus 20. So this is going to translate it with a narrower window, and then we'll do the same thing for y, 40 minus 20. Then we're going to make a variable called let's call it transform, and then we'll make a large string where we're going to add in our variables, interpolate them. So translate, remember we're trying to match this pattern. Translate parens, and then inside of those parens, we need to add our variable, the first one, which is x position, and then we need to add pixels, like you can see there, comma, and then another variable, and this one is y position, px, and then after this paren we add a space, and then we're going to rotate parentheses and add in our angle variable, and then add degrees after that. So this is what our string looks like if we were to console.log transform. If we click here, you can see we're getting this translate, and each time it should be different, and it is. So that's working. We're going to come back over here, and we're going to pass transform in. We're going to pass that in as an object in style. Style equals, and then we're going to set transform to be our variable transform from right here, and save. Now we get a card. It's randomly rotated and translated, but we have a problem. They're all changing each time. Why is that happening? Can you think of it? What the issue is? Well, it has to do with where we're actually setting that stuff. We're doing it inside of render. So every time there's a re-render, we're picking a new random transformation. And the issue with that is that whenever we add a new card into this stack, that means that the deck state changed, which means that it's going to re-render all of the cards. And so for re-rendering, we're getting new random numbers for the rotation and for the X and Y offset. So we don't want to be doing this inside of render. So where could we do it? What is going to run one time? Well, one option would be the constructor. So let's just start there. So just do our standard constructor. But then how are we going to have access to this variable transform down here? We're not going to add it into props or state because it's not going to change. It's a one-time thing. We can't add it into props anyway. But what we're going to do is add it to the object itself. So this, the component, this dot, and the standard thing would be underscore transform. And then we can come over here and reference this dot underscore transform. Now this is just one pattern to do this. There are other options, but I want to show you if you put it in the render, it's going to be rerun new random numbers every time. If we put it in the constructor, it runs one time. We have this string assigned to this dot underscore transform, and I can use it here in the render. And now as I click, those earlier cards are keeping the exact same values. It's just the new card that gets a new random transformation. And we keep going, almost done, hopefully, 52. There we go, we're all done. All right, so in the next video, I'll quickly touch on styling as far as colors, fonts, that sort of thing. Otherwise, we're done.